So in this video, I want to explore the possibility that thoughts are not what they appear to be. In fact, they may not be at all. And if you follow the video by the end, I think you'll see that thoughts have been playing an amazing trick on us. They seem not just to exist, but they're so often the source of our anxiety, depression, and to say that they don't exist is a bold statement. So I'm going to walk you through this, and you should be able to experience by the end for yourself that thoughts are not what they appear to be. So let's start off with Descartes, probably the most influential Western philosopher. And by that I mean he's permeated his thoughts into non-philosophers and really our daily lives to a large extent. And what he said about consciousness was really significant because I haven't heard anyone really disagree with his point on consciousness. And what he suggested is that, look, and maybe all this is an illusion. Maybe this is a trick when the physical world, or maybe I'm not really here sitting in this room and this computer isn't really here and the microphone isn't really here. It's just a trick being played upon my brain. Maybe it's a simulation, and that's the way we might talk in modern terms. I mean, or we might say that the brain is in a jar of some scientist's lab and they're just feeding data in like the Matrix. So how do I know I'm here? Well, you don't. And in fact, no one has been able to absolutely prove that. But the one thing we do know with absolute certainty is that consciousness is its own evidence for its own existence. In other words, you couldn't trick someone into believing they were conscious unless they actually were. So this is really important because it sets the stage for the whole video, because consciousness is self-evident of its own existence. And I have not heard anyone challenge that for hundreds of years. Okay. But the weird thing about starting off with Descartes, he was also a dualist. So he said that there is mind stuff and there's also the physical world stuff. And his great problem or challenge that was never solved is, how do these two interact? No one has ever proposed a way, although he did say like the pineal gland was the place that they interacted. This obviously has never really been followed up with any kind of evidence. And what I want to point out is why go through all the trouble of saying that thoughts have their own existence when what I'm going to show you in this video is that it's very difficult, and we might even say impossible, to become conscious of thought in the same way that we can become conscious of things in the physical world. So there's a bunch of steps in this. So I was looking at Goodreads and I was seeing how my book was doing, No Self, No Problem. And I was really surprised. There's a quote then, what's the most popular quote in the book? And there was a quote that just took me by surprise, and it's, to think is to think in categories, and there's no way around this. And so I was surprised that people picked that up because it really is such an essential, I guess I'm not surprised that it was such an essential part of the book, but it's complex to follow through. And I'm going to walk you through the steps in the video, maybe even a little bit more clear than I did in the book. So all thought is based on language. So we have the voice in the head, and this is for the everyday person. I mean, this is the thing that we think of as thinking from morning to night. We hear a voice in the head, and that's the left brain doing its thing. But when I did go into this about how all thought is based on language, and all language is based on categories, and that's really important. In fact, it's so important because researchers have suggested that the reason the left brain does language at all is because the left brain is so categorical. It's so good at categories that it was just natural for it to pick up language, because language is a categorical process. Okay, so what is a category? Well, it fits the left brain's attentional ability because the left brain has this narrow, focused attention, and that's how categories are formed. So you take a bunch of different things in the world, variety, all kinds of different things, and you just focus on. So you have to have that narrow spotlight that focuses on one thing that all these differences have in common. So you have to ignore a whole lot and focus on one thing, and then that creates the group. That creates the category. So if you think about dogs, and you have to ignore all the individual variation and just look at for what these things have in common. And these categories are very useful, and they can navigate our way around the world. And again, they may have been very useful for survival, but that doesn't make them real. It doesn't make them have any substance. They might be a useful illusion. So let's consider a couple thoughts and I'll show you how these are categorical, because when you create categories, they always have an opposite to them. Because if you're going to isolate one separate quality, there's always going to be some other at the other end of the spectrum. And so a simple statement, I like my dog. Well, let's walk through that. That's a category that's formed because it's me versus everyone else. Like versus dislike, my versus someone else's, and dog versus all the other possibilities in the world. Today I have to go to the dentist, and so today versus every other day, have to go versus you don't have to go to the dentist. Again, another isolated group that's held together by the narrow focus of attention, but that may not be in reality at all. So let's go back again to some of the categories that we might encounter every day. So my son is in soccer, and what creates these groups? And so sometimes it's just a shirt. And so if one group has, you look out and you see, 20 kids out on the field, but some of them have blue shirts and some of them have green shirts. It's like, okay, that is the thing that the left brain focuses on, and suddenly they become a group. But where does the group really exist? Can you become conscious of it? Because the main point of this video is that when we create categories, you can always become conscious of the example. And so I can look out and see, a kid with a green uniform and say, okay, well, he's part of this group. But can you become conscious of the group itself? And if you can't, that calls into question if it's even real. And because remember, Descartes said that consciousness is the one thing that we can stabilize our existence on. And so let's test this with a few examples again. And so touch something, here I've got a pen. And so, I can hold this and I can see it. And that really validates its existence. And yes, it may be an illusion, but it's an illusion taking place in consciousness and so that gives it some validity, even though the nature of it may be quite off, and it may be a simulation, and maybe my brain's just in a jar and this is all a matrix, but the conscious experience is real. Now let's go back to, say, the category of dogs. And yeah, you can become conscious of this example or that example, but right now, can you become conscious of the category? So let that sink in for a little bit. What about the category of Democrats? So and get a little political, and let's pick a political group. And so you might have an example and you say, well, I know this Democrat, I know this, but can you become conscious right now? In the same way that I can become conscious of this pen, or I can look at the screen, can you become conscious of the category itself? I doubt it. I mean, I'd like to hear your comments, but I think we're getting at the illusion of thinking and why we think that they exist, but they exist only as an assumption. Let's go back to the thought, I like my dog. Can you become conscious of I? I mean, what is the I? I mean, you can you can see examples. Well, part of the I is this body, part of the I is my social roles, and you could, again, so you're becoming conscious of some of the examples, but can you become conscious of the actual category? Like, can you become conscious of like? Let's talk about ownership. It's my dog. Can you become conscious of ownership? And so when we go through this, all these categories that occupy our time from morning to night, they all appear so real, and we fall for it, and they seem tangible. But the point of this video is that when you really dissect it, you can't even become conscious of what you think you're thinking. And this is really important because, I did a video on intrusive thoughts and it got so many views and people were really interested, which shows that these thoughts, a lot of us are getting to this, seem to be the clouds in between us and a sunny day, in between us and a peaceful life. And it's strange that for the vast majority of our existence, 200,000-300,000 years, we were not thinking, not the way we are now. And then if you look, about 200 years ago, it was a steady rise of thinking more and getting caught into this illusion that thoughts were real. And then all of a sudden, about 200 years ago, with the Industrial Revolution, we've got all these isms that suddenly, these abstract categories that suddenly took a hold of us, countries and laws and bureaucracy itself. And now from our workplace, and there are all these abstract categories that seem so real and occupy so much of our life. But the point of the video is you can't even become conscious of them. And that really puts into a question if they're even real.